Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the St. Gobain Studio Incentive Co-Learning Program 20.0, a platform that explores design through the lens of time. I would like to thank all 10 colleges who have been so enthusiastic in all activities that we have been running under the co-learning program until now. A huge shout out to MGR Chennai, who have maximum registrations of 65 students. We thank you for your zest and will be sending an Archman book as a token of our appreciation for your college. The 10 colleges today here are School of Architecture, Tumakuru, Dr. MGR Educational and Research Institute, Chennai, Boxon University, Hyderabad, Manipal School of Architecture and Planning, Nehru School of Architecture, Coimbatore, School of Architecture, CIET, Coimbatore, Rachna Sansad Academy of Architecture, Mumbai, SJB School of Architecture and Planning, Bengaluru, Madhav Institute of Technology and Science, Madhya Pradesh. We also have fun activity running throughout today's session. At different moments, you will hear 3 surprise questions. If you're quick and drop the right answer first in the chat, you win a prize. So instructions for institutions who are broadcasting. I request the faculty to type in the chat box whatever answer your students say. Our team will collect the names and whoever answers will be awarded later. So here goes the first question for the day. Get ready, students. Which architecture college has architect Biju designed? Shall we want you to get quickly typing out there?
They have to answer it before I present because I'm
Yes,
presenting
please.
that.
Yes, we want you to answer. Okay, we have some answers.
Someone says Sept, Biju.
Nice.
Good for you. Yeah.
And I should be happy or
So what we'll do is Sankitna will carry on and we'll see fastest fingers first when Biju is presenting. That was the idea also. Oh, there he is. Harini from CIET is.
Yeah,
Written.
okay, we
Great.
have an answer. So may I now invite architect Geeta Balakrishnan, founder of Ethos ASH, to say a few words to all of us.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, and really happy to be here and to have Biju with us, Biju from Architecture Red Chennai, talking about co-learn to design for the people. Architecture is never just about walls, roofs, or facades. It's about lives unfolding within them, as we all know. After all, a space comes alive only when people inhabit it. Behind every wall, corridor, color choice is a story of those who use it. And designing for people is really about designing with people in mind. People we are designing for, people who will eventually live there, people who get affected by what we build, people who build, those who are involved in the process of building, those who maintain the facility later. And I'm so glad that Biju took time off to join us for this session. I'd like to mention how architect Biju and his team at Architecture Red, including, of course, Natarajan Venkat Architects Nirupma was also part of it, supported Project Adyar, how Biju dived in, mentored students freely, how he used his pencil to kind of weave magic to showcase how a line can tie up many buildings into a set that converse with each other, different parts that converse with each other. And in this case, the line he drew was actually a corridor that became the feature that connected, and it's doing really well. How he helped students explore the role of color, and that's something he's really good at. And how all this plays such a defining role in his projects, always with a sensitivity to how people experience space. Thanks, Biju, for joining us. Vox Populi sessions were conceptualized to bring in the voice of students into the co-learning program. And I hand over now to Priyanka, our young colleague, to take us through a Vox Populi session that we ran on Instagram over the past few weeks successfully. Priyanka, all yours.
Yeah, so as part of our second Vox Populi initiative, students were invited to pass the prompt and share their unique perspectives through Instagram stories. We started the process with the second prompt for architect Biju Kuriakose's talk, For the People, Show Me a Space Where People and Architecture Quietly Connect. Each participant built on the previous one, creating a dynamic chain of thoughts, reflections, and expressions. This not only encouraged creativity but also gave students a sense of collective engagement, making their voices visible in a lively and interactive way. We were thrilled to share that the process led to over 30 plus Instagram stories of each student's take on the prompt. Here's a glimpse of some of the stories created by the students from across different colleges. Yeah. You can quickly go through all the images, actually. Yeah. So we had around 10 different colleges all over India participate in the session, and these are some of the wonderful images that were captured. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks, Priyanka, for sharing that, setting the tone for this session and sharing all that the students have sent. Now, before we get started, can we move on to the second question of the day, students? Get ready. Architecture Red is headquartered in which Indian city? So get typing. So may I parallelly request students to switch on their cameras, please? The Vox Populi conversation is student-led and sets ground for the mentor's talk. Today, the students bring to you what they understand about co-learning to design for the people means to them. Okay. May I request Nipun? Okay, may I request Vardhan to please take over to share your views, please? Yeah.
Guys, you can continue typing, whoever knows where Architecture Red is.
So good morning, everyone. So I am Vardhan Tated from Boxen University. For this semester, designing a bus terminal with a human touch means focusing on daily experiences of the people who are using it, and let's picturing a space where travelers find comfort in a shaded waiting areas. Then seating designed to bring families closer and pathways that are accessible and safe, both for adults and children. Incorporating the green spaces, ample lighting, and clear signage enhance safety, while using local materials, colors, native plants honor Zairabad's unique culture. And the bus terminal is more than just a transit point. It's a place of comfort, pride, and community engagement, making people transportation and healthy and vibrant for everyday life.
Thank you,
Thank
Vardhan.
you.
Over to you, Hafsa Minhaj from SIT. Please share your views on the topic.
Hello, good morning, one and all. Myself, Hafsa, and I'm from SIT. So, through my design project, Dwellings, I'm going to explore how the spaces can grow out through humans' needs, cultures, and shared experiences. So, to design for the people, first we must learn from the people. When we think of communities, it's not just about the people living together, it's about what defines them. Demographics like age, gender, occupation shape how spaces are used. Like, younger group prefers more open spaces and social hubs, whereas the older groups seek more quieter and secure environments. The economic strata of the society also plays a very important role. Wealthier group affords gated community with advanced security, whereas the other groups prioritize affordability and the basic needs. Culture and myths further influences design. The belief systems like Vastu plays a very important role as it shows how deeply the spaces are connected with the traditions. People also seek a strong sense of security, both physical and social, because safety shapes community life. And what truly binds communities? It's the shared activities such as festivals, parks, and the gathering spaces which keep the people connected together. In short, thriving communities emerges when we balance all such as demographics, shared activities, sense of security. To co-learn is to design for the people, with the people, and creating spaces that must honor their identities, their struggles, and their dreams. Or as Jangal reminds us, first life, then spaces, and then buildings. The other way around never works. Thank you.
Thank you, Hafsa. Over to you, Swastika Seth from Manipal SOA.
Hello everyone. Today I will be sharing my thoughts on emotions of the people for the space. So my current project is a kindergarten where emotions play a very important role because children respond to spaces differently than adults. A child feels happiness in a colorful open courtyard or comfort in a shaded corner under a tree. That is why my design is about shaping emotions trees, and instead of removing them, I'm using them as anchors for courtyards. These courtyards become the entrances to the school so that every child's first step into the space is through nature. This creates not just a physical entry, but also an emotional welcome. The feeling of greeted by light, shade, and greenery. So for me, designing is about shaping emotions, happiness, comfort, freedom, and connection. Architecture is not alive unless people feel it something in it. In a kindergarten, this becomes even more powerful because the space we create is can be the shape can shape the child's first relationship with learning and natural world. Thank you.
Thank you, Swastika. Over to you, Harini.
Okay, myself Hadni from SOICIT. So this semester we are designing a museum of geology. So according to me, designing for the people in a museum of geology is creating a space of balance, warmth, and inclusivity where everyone from families to students feels welcomed. And the museum should remove all barriers and allow people for free exploration and engaging the spaces to attain every knowledge. By fostering togetherness, harmony, and curiosity, the design becomes more than just being functional, and it becomes a place where people connect with both the science and also with each other. At the same time, architecture should play a role of storytelling to the people as well. So itself becomes a storyteller of the earth. So inspired by different geological layers and natural forms, the space guide visitors on a journey of discovery of the earth as well. So the path, the material, transitions, everything unfolds like a narrative so that the people can walk along through it. Thus, the museum is not just a container for exhibits, but a living experience for people and geology meet in harmony. Thank you.
Thank you, Harini. May I request Akhilesh from Manipal SOA to share his views, please?
Yes, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. So architecture is something where everything is designed by having human form into consideration. So for my current project, okay, kindergarten, we are designing a space for children. Emotions become a crucial part in the design. For a young mind, everything is different. Everything is something to be expected, and everything is something to be attracted towards. This curiosity is something to be emphasized in the design. The feeling a feeling where children can feel that they can go anywhere, where they can have their imaginations run wild. But them being in a secure place is what I'm displaying in my design. The young brain should be nourished properly in their early stages, and we should achieve that by the space they learn in. To design a space is to design for the human spirits, and for every dimension of architecture, it's find its meaning through the presence of places. Basically, for me, architecture is something where everything is to be done by having a human form into consideration. A space should be designed in such a way that the human brain is awakened by the mere presence of it, and the space built for all without any constraints, where the human brain can wander into imagination, is what architecture is all about. Thank you.
Can I request Shoaib from Reva University to share his views, please?
Good morning, everyone. This is Shoaib from Reva University. For me, the theme of human scale interaction is an inquiry into how people and environments complete each other. This time, we are designing wellness centers so we can understand the connection between environment as well as human centric design. Spaces are not neutral backdrops, they hold memory, evoke emotion, and root us in culture. At the human scale, design becomes intimate, where every step, a shadow, or a texture of a wall can be defined into a belonging. The interaction is only between people, but as well as flora, fauna, light, and as well as ecosystem where they live. That shapes our sense of place. Architecture here is not just a built environment, but a medium that heals, nurtures, and reminds us of our connection of humanity and the living world around us. Thank you.
Hello, Nipun this side from MIT School. So for this semester, we are designing a collected building. So for my vision, inclusivity is very important whenever we are designing a collected or a civic building. So I think the collected building should not act as a barrier, but should be envisaged as a place where people are heard and welcomed. Here the design plays an important role to make the elevate the space beyond the routine administration and transforming it into a place that connects the people with the spirit in the community, spirit of the community and responsive transformation. So that's but so here governance is not should his here governance is not hidden behind the walls. So but shared with the community, building trust, purpose, and a sense of belonging. Okay, that's it.
Thank you, Nipun. And thank you, everyone, for sharing your responses on what you understand co-learn to design for the people can be. I would now like to introduce to all of you architect Biju Kuriakose. It is my privilege to welcome architect Biju Kuriakose, an architect and urban designer whose work reflects a deep belief in the power of architecture to build communities and foster a sense of belonging. Architect Biju co-founded Architecture Red, a Chennai-based practice that approaches design not as a stylistic exercise, but as an act of placemaking, of weaving together memory, movement, and everyday life into spaces that people can truly call it their own. Educated in Mumbai and later at the Pratt Institute, New York, Architects Biju's journey has moved seamlessly between global and local contexts. From working with FX Fowl in New York on international master plans to shaping public spaces, housing, and institutions across Indian cities, his practice continually asks, how can architecture be inclusive, ecological, and socially rooted? His work has been recognized with multiple national and international awards, including the World Architecture News Award and the IAA National Award. In 2022, Architecture Red won the Council of Architecture's national competition to design the Center of Excellence at Bangalore University, envisioned as a porous and democratic space for architects. What stands out, however, is not only architect Biju's professional achievements, but also his role as a teacher and mentor. He has been a visiting critic at CEPT Ahmedabad and Kamla Raja Vidyanidhi Institute of Architecture, Mumbai, and remains deeply invested in engaging with students and young architects, encouraging them to see design as a tool for social transformation. Please join me in warmly welcoming architect Biju Kuriakose. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Sangeetna. Thank you, Geeta and Ethos, for having me getting involved in this. It's a wonderful initiative. I think kudos to all of you guys who continuously engage with the students and academia and try and kind of bring in the change that is direly needed. And so very happy to be part of this. And thanks again. Good morning. Yeah, good morning, everyone. So I've went through many of the questions that were outlined by the students, and I think one thing I learned in architecture is that there are no direct answers to any questions, and so all we do, all I can do is to kind of talk about our experience, talk about how we look at the world, what we understand about the world, and it's up to all of you to kind of really interpret and find answers from the experiences that many of us have, and the practice that we do. So today's presentation will take a bit through. Of course, it's weaved in with a lot of our projects. But what is more important is also how we look at the world, what is our understanding of the world, and how we use projects as a way to kind of really kind of try and sort of weave in a lot of our ideas of how the world should grow, and that's to me is the sort of the wonderful nature of our profession. It gives us this great tool to kind of really express ourselves and our view on both critique of how the world is growing, but also a tremendous amount of opportunity to showcase and demonstrate how we should be building, and what is the nature of the development that we talk about. How do we kind of put people in place? So a lot of our work is really a response to the context we practice in, the socio-political and economic and cultural context that we practice in. So we are constantly researching and trying to find out what is that context, and that becomes a huge part of our investigations within the studio. In other words, every project when we get it becomes a wonderful way to kind of really understand the site, the program, but also its global relevance. The larger macro level relevance in terms of what that typology means, what the issues that a particular typology faces, and how do we use the project as a way to kind of demonstrate a better way of doing things, at least an attempt to kind of showcase a better way of doing things. And so I often say that we are while we critique the context within which we practice, we are also participants in it, because we resist, but we also show what it is. So there is a certain kind of what do I call, lack of better word, there's a certain kind of hypocrisy in practice, because you have to engage with that same context that you critique. So and then kind of try and find solutions within this. And in that sense, projects becomes what is fascinating for us through the practice is to really try and look at what are the theoretical frameworks that can come out of the practice that we do. And to go back to academy and tell this, through the practice, this is what we are discovering, this is what we understand the world. And then how do we kind of then at an academic level engage with that world, or kind of try and find new tools to kind of engage with that world. So I will take you through the presentations, and then we can probably have our question answers afterwards. So it's titled Imagining Buildings as Places. And this is in some sense really the kind of crux of what we do. We are very interested in try and kind of understanding what is the nature of the projects that we are engaged in, and how do we look at buildings as not as objects but as places, and a lot of it is also coming out of the practice that we do, and the things that we discover through the practice we're doing. So what I will be through the presentation, what I'll be doing is to first take you through the kind of that context that I talked about. What is that context within which we practice, and or rather, what are the things that we find in context that influence the work that we do, and then through the projects demonstrate how we address some of those issues, how do we engage with some of those issues. We are also a practice which is involved in projects of different scales and different typologies. Something that we've been very conscious about is that we think the beauty of an architect, being an architect or an architecture profession, is the sort of the general nature of the profession. In other words, it has this ability to kind of look at the world holistically and try and find out solutions much more holistically than any other professions. So hence, one thing we were very particular is that we are not a practice which specializes in one typology, rather try and attempt to become good at all typologies. In other words, our strength comes from the fact that we are generalist and not specialist. And so you will see through the presentations projects of different scale, different typologies, etc. But try and kind of in all of these projects, all of these different typologies, try and look at similar kind of or try find commonalities in terms of the issues that you deal with, and look at projects as a way to find solutions. So the socio-economic and political context that we live in today throws many challenges at us, which deeply impact the long-term sustainability of our cities. In times of pervasive digitalization, migration, climate crisis, and increasing social divisions and inequitability, the creation of places to meet the other has become one of the most crucial tasks for us as architects. So what does it mean to practice architecture today here in India, in our cities, amidst a friction between speed and care, the market and meaning, the density and dignity? Across the country, cities are being remade, not gradually or organically, but rapidly and often carelessly. Growth has become our dominant narrative, but in its name, much is being erased. The materials may be new, yet the spatial imagination is oddly familiar, driven more by templates of capital and efficiency than by cultural memory or lived experience. Places with texture and contradiction are being flattened into smooth, anonymous landscapes of glass and concrete. Streets are widened, but communities thinned. Buildings go up faster, but forget the ground they stand on. Architecture becomes a product of speed, but not of place. This is not just a crisis in architecture, it's a crisis of imagination, a deeper displacement in which values like empathy, care, and continuity are increasingly devalued. So these are pictures of some of the buildings from across different cities in our country, and you can see the sort of the what ties them all together, and the idea of people and places completely goes away in many of these buildings. They are very opaque. They may be glass buildings, but very opaque in its the nature in which they operate. They think more of buildings as objects as opposed to buildings as places where people come together, congregate, and celebrate life. And it completely takes away the idea of place, even from the context, climate, etc. as well. And so you can see that sort of the flattening of those buildings, and in some sense culture and lifestyle as well. So as a practice, we learned early on that if we hope to make any meaningful impact, we must engage with the complexities of our context, not from outside but from within. This means that rethinking our processes and methods and reimagining the very way we work. It also became clear that understanding the socio-political and economic realities we operate within is not optional, it is essential. In an environment where less and less is in the hands of the public and more is in the control of the private, whether a corporation or an individual, what place does social equity and civitas have? So, our approach as a practice has been twofold. One that is of the larger territory of the urban, is geography, economics, and ecology. So, these has to do with large planning projects. We work collaboratively with other disciplines and also with many other architects, engaging in the public realm, working with the city agencies, getting involved in public projects to kind of try and look at the larger urban territory and try and influence that in one side. And that's one set of a projects which involves a different kind of process. Often we find that here we are less of designers and more of facilitators. So our role as an architect also completely changes in many ways. And the second is that of a more localized urban intervention, the urban building or urban insert, as the case may be. Each of these scales have led to a manner of engagement that is distinct for each, a duality of operation within the practice. So, what's the context within which we practice? Like I talked about, this is, for example, Chennai. If you look at Chennai, it has about 11 million population. What is fascinating is that last statistics, which says that it has about 0.81 square meters per person as social spaces. And the minimum requirement that WHO prescribed is about 9 square meters per person. Korea talks about 22 square meters per person. But you can see the amount of rather the lack of social spaces in our cities. And in Chennai, we are also blessed with a large coastline, so which allows us to kind of have a lot of public space along the coastline without really having the anybody to create any public spaces. Even with that, if you look at the kind of the scale of the social spaces that we need, is completely scarce. I mean, there is a clear lack of open spaces, or rather, spaces that allows you to kind of feel at home in a city is completely missing. And if you look at across many cities, you will find similar statistics, except for Bangalore and Delhi, which traditionally had large swaths of open space, historical spaces. You will find similar kind of statistics across our cities. So there is a sort of a complete lack of public space and open space. This is another statistic which also I find it fascinating. This tells that almost 31% of urban India goes to work by foot. Another 20% goes by bicycle. In other words, more than 50% of urban India goes to work by non-motorized transit. And if you add another 20% to that as two-wheelers, you will find that almost 70% of urban India goes to work by either foot, bicycles, or two-wheelers. In other words, the majority of the people engage with that city completely different from how we are actually building our cities. Our buildings are continuously being built for cars, private cars. And if you look at the statistics, you will find that the amount of people that use private cars is very, very negligible compared to the large amount of number of people that who engages with non-motorized transit and also two-wheelers. Which is also how many of our cities continues to be quite sustainable in many ways, because in some sense we are poor to a large extent, and that makes us walk and kind of have bicycles. So the point is that we still don't care for that sort of the invisible people who really need the kind of infrastructure like sidewalks, public spaces, etc., to kind of really continue to kind of go to work by foot or bicycles, using proper infrastructure, and the focus largely remains away from that. We continue to build many flyovers after flyovers, coastal roads after coastal roads, even though the number of people who engages with these spaces are much, much less. So about a few years back, we were hired to kind of look at one entire neighborhood by the Corporation of Chennai. In fact, we've been working with the Corporation of Chennai along with many other architects in the city for the past 10, 12 years, try and kind of really influence the corporation. Many architects, not just us, many architects in the city, it's done a lot of pro bono work, try and kind of influence the city and city agencies. And about 3, 4 years back, finally city has kind of warmed up and started initiating a lot of these projects. And we were hired to look at an entire neighborhood of Adyar, those who are familiar with Chennai, to kind of create public spaces and look at almost 26 kilometers of public streets to, promote more pedestrian friendly sidewalks and streetscape. We've been working with Urban Design Collective, Vidya, and a landscape firm out of New York to kind of collaboratively working to kind of create these for the past 4 years. If you look at that's the map of Adyar. These are the areas that we are kind of working on. Almost 26 kilometers of street network. But what is also important is this critical nodes along that streetscape, which we wanted to kind of look at it much closely as public spaces, and these nodes represents kind of different entries to different neighborhoods. But Adyar as a large, as a neighborhood itself, is in some sense a place and a portal. It's a portal when you come from the southern part of the state into the city. It really becomes a portal into the main city. But it's also a wonderful place. It's called the neighborhood of street trees, because it has about 30% tree cover compared to 15% for the rest of the city. And it's truly a neighborhood of trees. So when we got the project, a lot of our initial studies was to really kind of look at what is the characteristics of this neighborhood, how do we build upon what is positive, and try and kind of find solutions to that. So we looked at it from the standpoint of environment, mobility, livability, inclusivity, and functionality, and looked at each of these nodes from all these 5 different perspectives and tried to kind of find solutions to it. I'll just quickly take you through a couple of streets which we just finished making the drawings. It takes a long time for anything to get done in public realm. It's been almost 4 years and nothing has been built yet. We finished the tender drawings for 3 streets. These are a couple of them. I'll just quickly take you through. This is the Taluk Office Road. This is a road which connects a new metro station, a Little Mount station, to the governor's bungalow. That very, very important street as you come from the southern part into the city. It really becomes a gateway street where you transition into to the more denser part of the city. It's in Guindy. But if you look at the street, the image that you see on the screen is the character of that street, completely dominated by cars. Very little infrastructure in terms of the people walking, etc. None of them exist, and completely filled with conflicts. A lot of accidents happen because buses are moving in all different lanes, crossing over, etc., etc. And this is not just about this particular street, but you will actually find similar characteristics across our country in many of our streets. So here again, you can see there are only 4 dedicated lanes officially, but rest of the space are also asphalted, and you will see that there's hardly much space for people to walk, even though Indian cities are dominated by pedestrians largely from the statistics I talked about earlier. So a lot of our initial 5 6 months went in kind of really studying the street. So this was a project which was not just about the above grade. We were also looking at the utilities under the road to kind of really redesign those utilities. That's the metro station here, and so there was a natural space there which we wanted to look at it as a metro plaza in some sense, but it's completely dominated by asphalt and car parking right now. There is no, I mean, if when you come out of the metro and if you cross the road without getting hit by a car, you are lucky. And that's the nature of the kind of spaces and negligence that we do to our cities in terms of the people and caring for the people. And so that characteristics continues across. There are three different nodes we identified, which is of course the metro space outside the metro, the an intersection which leads into a residential neighborhood, and the third is in front of the governor's bungalow. And that again, you can see completely complete negligence to pedestrians and people in many sense. We did a lot of mapping to really understand where the parking happens, where the retail activities are, the relationship between the two, how the pedestrians move through the day, different times. So these were mapped for different times, different days to kind of really understand the pedestrian activity. And you can see the a lot of retail activities on the northern side of the street, and you can see the concentration of the pedestrians largely around those retail activities. And as you come down to the governor's bungalow, where there are less and less of pedestrian activities, there's also a lot of concerns about security, etc., which limits a lot of pedestrians from walking down. But the larger concentration of the pedestrians are on the northern side of the street. What is also interesting about the street is that even though it is one place, it has multiple places within that one place. It has a temple, it has a church, it has a mosque, all on that sidewalk, with people spilling out without really having much of infrastructure. So again, much like Indian street, any Indian street, these are these are the places or the pauses within the street that brings character to those streets. So we mapped them as well. We wanted to integrate them as part of our new redesigned street. We also looked at the relationship between the built and the unbuilt and each of the sections. So if you go every 200 meters, you will actually find a completely different character for those streets. This is in front of the metro station. You can see a lot of car movement, a lot of conflicts. As you go down, there's a lot more retail activities, and then closer to the governor's bungalow, there's less pedestrian activities. So each of these sections, every 100 200 meters, the character of the street very subtly changes. Of course, the overall character remains the same, but when you deeply analyze it, you will kind of try and kind of find those changes as well. And so, in terms of our propositions, our thinking was to really kind of create a public space outside the metro station so that the people who comes out of the metro has a place to pause and kind of congregate and create a third space for them. And then, of course, slow down the traffic where the residential neighborhood starts, and of course, create another place outside the governor's bungalow as well. And so what we did is to kind of really imagine the entire street as a park, and we said we'll put the 4 lanes that are required in that street. Once we put that, we realized that there is so much space we can carve out from that street. And what you see in green is a sort of a linear park that we proposed, without sacrificing any of the official lanes that were required on that side, on that street. So you continue to have the 4 lane traffic, but yet kind of carve out a linear path because there was so much space already left, which were right now lying as conflict zones. And then we proposed a new signalized junction there so that there are no fast moving traffic there. The cars slow down and create a public space right outside that metro station so that people can come out of the station, pause for some time. There will be vendors, etc. And before they go home, it becomes a wonderful place to congregate. And then closer to the governor's bungalow more as an ecological park that we were looking at. And then once we designed that, we then put all of those sort of this things that we discovered within the street, the temple, the play zones, the church, the mosque, we put all of them back into that park so that it continues to kind of hold on to all of those things that made those streets so special, and kind of integrate them as part of the new design. This is a master plan. That's the space outside the metro. This is a linear park which comes and ends in that ecological park. A little more zoomed in version of that, you can see that Metro Plaza outside the metro station. This is the state of it now, and that's how it is proposed. So you can see that it really integrates people and create a place for people in our cities. There is a courthouse there. Again, similar approach. Reimagine that entire zone, which is lying as conflict zone right now. Take it as a public realm so that it becomes a wonderful place for people to congregate. In some sense, give the city back to the people, back to the pedestrians, back to the people who walk on the street, because that is where the infrastructure is badly needed. There is a footover bridge lying pretty unused right now. So we were using the space underneath that to kind of activate that street. Outside the temple, we subtly changed the paving pattern to kind of create, again, differentiate it from the rest of the street so that it becomes a place to pause and congregate outside there. There are low income housing next to it. So the park, then we started working with the residents of those low income housing to kind of understand what their needs are. And so proposed a playground for the kids who live in those low income neighborhoods, and integrate them as part of the new proposed design. Like I said, it was not just an above grade beautification project, as many of the cities do it. It was a complete street project where we work with different agencies to kind of really understand what were the utilities under the streets, and then redesign all of those utilities and integrate them as part of the new street design. Another project in the similar vicinity, but has a street which has a completely different relationship to the city. This is next to a low income housing. It's a much smaller street within a neighborhood, so it doesn't have the kind of the larger macro relationships that the other street has. But what is also interesting is that it connects to local train stations. And so we proposed creating what we call as a loop, which connects both these stations, so you can walk across those stations, and eventually its influence can be spread into the residential neighborhood as well. A similar approach, looking at the street more as a park as opposed to vehicles, and then just put enough lanes. In this case, we made the street very tight, so there's only one lane each, of 3 meter each, and then we took all the spaces on the sides and gave it back to the people who live in those low income neighborhoods. What is interesting about low income neighborhoods and their relationship to the street is that you often find that the street actually becomes a living room for the people who live in low income housing units, because the units are so small that you always find them on the street. There's a greater sense of community, and the street really becomes their living room. And so with that idea, we went in and we said, we can't give these wide streets for the cars. We tightened the vehicular movement, and then reimagine the rest of the space as the living room for the people who live in those low income neighborhoods. And that's the section you can see here. Less than half is given to the cars. The rest is all taken as a people space. Very rigorous process. I think somebody asked about the process in the question. So like I said, initially, when you do a public project, you often find that your role is less of a designer and more of a facilitator. So that you make sure that the process is done right, so that people who live next to these streets take ownership of those streets. Eventually, the people should be part of any city building project, because city is home for people who live in cities. And it's important that people take ownership of their cities that they live in. So here there are multiple level of engagement with different stakeholders. One was, of course, engaging with all the agencies, bringing them together, try and look at what are the utilities, whether it's electricity, sewer, all of those kind of gas, etc., etc. And really integrate them. Traffic police was one of the key stakeholders. Integrate them as part of the initial planning process. Second was to engage with the people, the community there. Of course, there are different kinds of communities. There's an affluent community, which is in the Srinagar colony, but there's a low income housing as well. There are a lot of retail owners who will be impacted by this design. So there was a lot of community engagement, which almost went for 6, 8 months to kind of work with and try and get their feedback and integrate them as part of the design process. And so, almost 2, 3 years of work going back and forth on these projects. Of course, there you can see Vidya there, who was a key part of the project, working collaboratively with us. Architecture is a cultural act. This is David Chipperfield who talks about architecture and says that it's a cultural act, not just a technical one. And if we forget this, we leave the territory open to others less concerned with the public realm. He reminds us that architecture's role is not only to solve problems or deliver functions, it is to construct meaning in the public realm. But how do we do that in a country where the public realm itself is so contested? And you can see from the examples that I showed you, fragmented and fragile. This is one of the critical challenges of practicing in India. How do we claim architecture as a cultural social act in a climate that sees it largely as a commodity or a service? Here, practice demands a constant negotiation with the market, with policy, and with scarcity. And yet, it is precisely in this pressure that an opportunity arises to be relevant, not despite these constraints, but because of them. Like I said, our work is influenced by our understanding of the world. We like to embrace challenges. We like to look at work within the limits that is offered to us and try and find creative solutions to that. And so a lot of our work is influenced by that thinking. As cities rapidly grew in the 19th century, the modernist planning approach placed in utmost prominence the object. And so when I studied architecture, we were greatly influenced by these objects. We're looking at Corbusier, looking at Kahn, etc., Frank Lloyd Wright's, ideas with city building and urbanism, etc., etc. And we were really fascinated by these objects, and buildings and cities were designed more as aspirations of form and less of study of human life. Cities were transformed with vast open spaces, holding a collection of objects as priorities shifted to fast-paced vehicular movement. While it made for interesting formal expressions, the city designed from an aerial view, at a human level, places were vast, inactive, and alien in scale. And that's what you'll see across. I mean, this is when Chandigarh was designed, it had these wonderful, beautiful objects. But if you look at the spaces around it, they were vast and open, but there were less people in it. And you will see that in many of the modernist kind of way of working. This is Oscar Niemeyer. They were fantastic spaces, but there was a lack of dialogue between these objects and the space because there were hardly much people there. And so when I did urban design, when I went to New York to study urban design, I went straight away into the sort of the new theoretical thinking of new urbanism. And that really influenced the way, I looked at the cities and my understanding of the cities when from my undergraduate studies to the graduate studies. So, as a reaction to modern cities, the new urbanism movement brought the focus back to human scale and the pedestrian experience. While these fragmented, active, vibrant, and walkable cities, while this facilitated active, vibrant, and walkable cities, the importance of building as an object of expression, identity, and curiosity, faded away in the urban design and the planning discourse. And so that was largely my critique about the new urbanism, is that it really kind of brought people back to the city, brought people back to the streets, but the sort of the architectural imaginations of the building that surrounded were really kind of was about looking back to the past. And so it was recreating some of the traditional build forms, etc. And to me, that was not the right approach to kind of look at least the way one kind of articulated that object. And the object, there was a negligence to look at object as an expression, identity, and curiosity. And this completely got faded away in that urban design discourse. And so when we started the practices, we had these two kinds of cities: the figure ground that you see on the left, which is how we build our modern cities, and the figure ground that you see on the right, which is a traditional city. One is largely about people, one is largely about the object. And we realize that we have to find a way, if we have to really try and find meaning within the context that we practice in, we have to find a way to kind of really look at and merge both these ideas. And the idea of looking buildings as an expression in some sense, cultural expressions in some sense, but also to kind of really looking at buildings less as objects but more as places, so that people can dominate and take over these buildings. So as a practice, we have both the critique of the current context as well as attempting to demonstrate design processes that utilizes opportunities within this systemic framework to focus on creating places for people, strengthening communities, and facilitating the expression of identities. The act of building is viewed as an inquiry into placemaking, a spatial manifestation of movement, memories, and life patterns. So we've been engaged with the university here in Chennai for the past 10, 12 years. We've done multiple buildings. So it gave us a wonderful opportunity to kind of really test some of these ideas. How do you imagine buildings as places as opposed to buildings as objects? And so this is the first building, the section of the first building that we did. It's the School of Aeronautics, very large building, almost 2 lakh square feet in that campus, which was largely horizontal, but because it became a university and the land was limited, they wanted to densify the campus. And so the idea was to kind of, how do we kind of create a vertical campus in a way that you don't really lose the connect with the ground, and still use the building as a place for celebration for people to congregate and come together. And so what we did is to kind of articulate a section in a way that you kind of come from the larger campus. It's a very, very porous campus, the porous building per se. So it allows the larger campus to kind of come into the building. There is a courtyard within that building, so that it gives a sense of identity for the students of the School of Aeronautics without really losing its connect and the identity towards the larger campus. And so that figure and the ground has been negotiated in a way that the building gets weaved into that spaces and into the campus, as opposed to having a object sits on the ground. That's kind of how the building looked when it was completed. You can see that ground gradually kind of flows into that building. The building is lifted up so that at a pedestrian level, people can experience much more easily. The scale is much more porous. So the scale is much more smaller. The building is much more porous. So there is a certain, it's almost kind of designed as a way to curate or curate the movement of the people through that building without really being impacted by the scale of that building. So you can see that building is lifted up, and what it also creates all of these wonderful spaces under the building, so that in some ways in a climate like Chennai, it gives you this wonderful opportunity to use buildings more like an umbrella, where it shades and protects you, and you can occupy those spaces through the day because there's a continuous shading that is happening. And then when you come inside, it opens into this courtyard, which is open to sky, and which allows you to kind of evoke all your senses. So when it rains, you kind of experience the rain. There's a tremendous amount of breeze that goes through the building, which also allows that density to be felt lighter. And so the constant investigation was to kind of really see how people can be comfortable in that space, in that scale of building, both in terms of the height, but also in terms of its mass, and create porosity at human scale, so that it just feels like openness everywhere. And so that's kind of how we designed, and that space then becomes a place to kind of, for many activities to kind of happen. The courtyard in the middle. Palasma says that buildings are not abstract, meaningless constructions or aesthetic compositions. They are extensions and shelters of our bodies, memories, identities, and minds. Consequently, architecture arises from existentially true confrontations, experiences, recollections, and aspirations. So the unbuilt really becomes the framework to kind of hold people in there, and it becomes an extension of the built in some ways, and it allows people to create memories and identities within those spaces that we create. This is the School of Architecture, which we recently completed. It's a very tight site within that larger campus. You can see it's a very linear site. That itself presented a tremendous amount of challenges. How do you design an architecture school in such a long and linear site, and still create the kind of spaces that we need for students to kind of engage in? And so the first thing we did is, again, lift up the building so that the larger campus can kind of come into the building. The building becomes a thoroughfare for people to walk through. And then we started designing an atrium, and we realized that atrium doesn't work because the scale of that space or the geometry of the site is very, very linear, rectilinear. And if you just do a atrium, it just becomes very static at one space. So what we did is to kind of carve out a section in the courtyard. So what it does is that every floor has a courtyard which opens into the next, which opens into the next, and then eventually kind of that courtyard opens out into the campus. It breaks the building up, it makes the building breathable. It again breaks the scale down, and there is a certain human scale attached to each of the courtyard, because you are comfortable in that space that you stand in, even though it's an 8-story building. And so you can see that courtyard staggers up at different levels. These are diagrams of all the floor plans. And that's kind of how that building looks like. So it becomes a wonderful place for, congregation. It's an imagination of a traditional courtyard reworked to kind of bring people back into the sort of the way we build today, in terms of responding to our building regulations, and in terms of our need for higher density buildings, but without losing that idea of that court and the idea of spaces that which allows people to come together. So here every floor has a courtyard which is open in the sides. It is not open to the sky, but it's open on the sides. It allows you to connect with the larger context and the campus seamlessly. The building becomes very breathable, and you're comfortable even when you are in that seventh floor or the eighth floor. When you come into that courtyard at that particular level, you feel like you are outside. It constantly connects you with that outside world. It allows you to again experience the rain, wind, etc. It's very light when you are in that space because the wind is constantly hitting you. So it's a reimagination of a traditional courtyard with a higher density, and also responding to our building regulations today. And then within that larger space, much like how we saw it in that street, there are multiple smaller spaces within that larger space. So you create so that students and people can engage in different scales of activities. So it can be much more intimate. In this particular case, it's a smaller space carved out within that larger space. So the idea is to kind of create these places for students, people, in many sense, that they are comfortable engaging and experiencing and be part of that space. Again, a porous building, it just opens up. There are no doors in getting into the campus. It allows the larger campus to just flow into that building. Ground floor becomes spaces for exhibitions, and its way to kind of engage with the larger campus. And these are sections of some of the other buildings we are doing here. So you can see, when it comes to high density, we still don't want to lose the connect with the people. And so the section becomes a crucial part of that negotiation to kind of really take the building back to the people, or give the building back to the people and activities, and fill it with life, a lot of life, so that these buildings then becomes a place for celebration, rather than becomes exclusive enclaves within which one kind of only stay within your private space. To practice in India is to work within a deeply political terrain. Our buildings are not innocent. They reflect who gets to live where. And this is across our country. You can see that our buildings are becoming more and more exclusive. People are told which building they can live in, which building they can't access in, who gets light and air, who walks and who drives, who is invited in and who is left out. We cannot afford neutrality, and so we must ask, can our buildings invite rather than exclude? Can they hold plural identities rather than singular narratives? How do we insert architecture into spaces already charged with life and strong contextual clues from the past? The idea of porosity, physical, visual, and social, is a way to resist enclosure. In a country as complex as ours, opacity, architecture or otherwise, often translate to exclusion. Porosity is a political act, a way to resist enclosure, a way to keep architecture open to possibility, to community, to time. A process through which building is not an act of erasure, but enriching the context. This is a project which we recently completed. There's a Miyasi School of Architecture, many of you may know, in Chennai. It's a larger campus, and we recently did rework. It's an adaptive reuse project. We did their School of Management, which is right next to the School of Architecture. And so when the clients came to us, they said they had a completely different brief. They came to us to do the interiors of that building. They wanted to spice up that school of management. They said they have new programs, new requirement, and they came to us a brief to kind of add more and more rooms into that building, existing building, and really kind of do an interior design project. And so when we visited the site and when we took a tour of the building, we realized that that building has larger issues than just doing makeover and doing cosmetic changes. And so that is where we started. We said that here's a building which is right at the beginning of the campus, and this larger campus extends down. But if you look at this building, it's been operating as a fortress in many ways. So it has a courtyard. I'll show you some pictures. That courtyard is completely cordoned off. You feel suffocated when you are in that courtyard. It has another space at the back which is becomes a dump yard because there is no relationship between these two. And then behind is the architecture school, and at some point they decided to put a wall there so that students from here doesn't go into the architecture school. So it is a campus with many disciplines, but none of those disciplines interact with each other. And if you look at the front, when you come out of the come out of the campus, or rather the building, you come straight into the road. In other words, there are no places to pause. There are no places for students to congregate. It's clearly an object functioning like an object where as a student, you come into the classroom, you finish the classroom, and get out and go. There's a wonderful banyan tree at the back, which nobody knew existed because it is completely, again, cordoned off in many ways, and that banyan tree was almost suffocating being within that buildings. All the dead walls opened into it, and there was no relationship, or one was not really kind of taking advantage of that. And so when we looked at it purely as a plan, we realized that there is a lot of wonderful spatial opportunities that exist within that campus. And so what started as a project of addition eventually become a project of subtraction. So we went back to them by removing some of these rooms. We said, there's an opportunity here. If you really want to transform the campus into a wonderful management school, you have to think more than just adding programs. You have to think of how does it first function as a campus itself. And so this is kind of how it looks. It used to look. So when you come out of the building, you come into that driveway. They're all taken over by cars. It functions as an object, really in a terrible state in terms of its relationship to, or giving it to the people and the students. So even on the sides there were spaces. This is before you enter the architecture school. You can see again dominated by cars. This is the courtyard that existed. So you can see even the parapet walls are all cordoned off with joinery. Everything was like a room. Even that courtyard functioned like a room. And you can see the state of that. There's another courtyard behind this room, but completely cut off because there's a toilet there, and it becomes a dump yard at the back because there's no relationship to the people. Again, some of the pictures, there was some of these wonderful spaces overlooking into the football ground, but again, completely used as a dump yard. So that's kind of how sort of the building functioned. You come out of the building completely dominated by cars outside. That's the banyan tree. There's an auditorium here. So that auditorium was built around that banyan tree, but it's all dead walls around it. Nobody knew about that banyan tree because there was no way to kind of really experience that. And so first thing, so we clearly knew that we have to really kind of almost do a surgical intervention in some sense, and look at all these possible, potential opportunities, and how do we kind of really bring them back. So first thing we did is to kind of remove that space, that room that existed there. And we said we will allow this entire campus to open up. We knocked off the wall. We said it has to connect to that architecture school so that the building in some ways becomes a thoroughfare. We removed all the car parking that existed there. We moved that line down a little bit so that one kind of gets a sort of a pause space in front of the building. And we made that into a sort of a seating area and landscape area. so that you don't come out of the building straight into the road. What we did is that we created that at a higher level seating area. So when you come into the building, you go to both these sides and then created larger public spaces there. So in other words, the building is now transformed into a thoroughfare. It removes all the things that came into the way. It allowed the campus to kind of flow through this management school, and then and opened up that courtyard. We also kind of removed that part of the classroom there, so that this banyan is now part of the courtyard, so it gets experienced even when you stand there. So you kind of open up into that courtyard, added new functions on top of that auditorium. So you can see it's a constant attempt to kind of create public space for people and the students within that campus. It's the same existing building. We were kind of removing, subtracting things, and then putting things back in some sense. And the terraces were activated to kind of use it for multiple purposes. And then we said it's not enough to just to kind of create a public space there. We also wanted to create a sense of enclosure. So we kind of did this porous wall, in some sense borrowing from the arches that existed within that campus. Created this GFRC, glass reinforced concrete wall, which really kind of creates a sense of enclosure. It doesn't have a roof, it's open to sky, but it kind of creates a sense of enclosure, very, very blurred way, so that when you come out of the building, you go to both these public spaces on two ends. You can't really come out straight into that. And then the paving, we removed that asphalt, and we said, even if you want people to drive there, let's put permeable paving there so that they drive slowly, so that it's largely envisioned as a public space. And so you can see that new section of the courtyard, it opens up, it allows the hot air to rise up, it allows more wind to flow through the building. And on the ground floor, the building just becomes a thoroughfare. So you can walk in any different ways. You can come here, enter, go out into the architecture school, you can connect. Building becomes a very porous entity. And that's kind of how the building looked. This is that porous wall that we created. You're kind of layering, and you put this modern contemporary wall around the traditional building, but you still continue to see glimpses of that building behind through this thing. So this is one of the side entrances where you have again a banyan tree. So you enter there, you walk down into that street. It also start to kind of create, because the building was earlier fragmented, now it creates a very strong axis or a direction towards that minaret, and it actually quite nice when you walk down that street. It start to kind of put a lot of accesses in place, and like that, like I was saying. And then this entire space, both outside and inside, becomes a place for people to congregate. Students thrive in these spaces now. It just becomes a wonderful place. It's a very small space. It's not a. It also shows us that you don't need large spaces of intervention. You need to curate them in a way that there is a strong relationship between the people and the program, so that the program then spills out into that spaces. So that's the 2 meter corridor that we created with the landscape on the side. You go there today, it's much more lush, and then carve-in seating there, it becomes a wonderful place for people to congregate. And even outside that street, it's a drivable surface, but by changing that paving to a permeable paving, it kind of creates it almost puts pedestrians first. In other words, it creates a feel of being pedestrianized. Even while cars move there, they move much more slowly than one moves on an asphalt. This is that room which got knocked off. It opens up. That was that dump yard at the back, which is converted as an extension of this internal courtyard. And then it opens out into the architecture school. It just creates a completely different experience. So this is that courtyard. And then we reprogram some of the ground floor now has library, canteen, etc., so that it activates that ground. And you can see the nature of that building completely changed from what it was to a completely porous building. Of course, brought in a lot of colors. It's a very tight budget project, so we had to really use colors very strategically to kind of really liven up that program. That's the banyan. So you can see that we created a grating around that banyan so people can congregate outside that banyan and stay there. This is the canteen on the ground floor, and that's kind of how the buildings are designed. How much time I have? I have 2, 3 projects more. If I need to stop, you let me know. Otherwise, I'll take another 10-15 minutes.
Yes, sir, sure.
It's fine?
Yeah, for another 10 15 minutes.
Okay, I'll quickly go through.
Yeah.
In cities across India, the built environment increasingly feels disconnected from the lives of the people it is meant to serve. And I just want to talk a little bit about housing. Again, a typology that we are very passionate about and been engaged in for the past 10 years. And so, as housing developments multiply, they seem to lose the ability to foster a sense of place, a feeling of belonging. What makes a place meaningful? Why do so many contemporary housing projects, whether luxury apartments or government housing schemes, feel placeless? Housing is a precondition both for work and for leisure. More than any other item of consumption, housing structures the way that individuals interact with others, with communities, and with wider collectives. No other modern commodity is as important for organizing citizenship, work, identity, solidarities, and politics. Housing is at many levels is under attack today. It is caught within a number of simultaneous social conflict. There is a conflict between housing as lived social space and housing as an instrument for profit making. A conflict between housing as home and housing as real estate. So this is the biggest challenge that we have, is that how do you look at housing as home, when, as opposed to housing as a purely as a real estate assets. In today's modern urban context, often people look at housing more as a real estate investment as opposed to housing as a home. So this is again Korea, who kind of talks about the fact that you need about 22 square meters per person to live in a city. And you often find that when you analyze our existing housing complexes, you hardly find 1 or 2% or 1 or 2 square meters per person within this neighborhood. So we knew that if we have to kind of engage in housing, it only becomes meaningful if you are able to kind of create spaces for congregation, spaces for celebration, spaces that inculcate values, a sense of belonging and identity, and also vibrant. In other words, housing has to become a place for people as opposed to an object. This is a project we are just finishing in Trivandrum, a very high density development close to the Raj Bhavan. This is very much in the city. This is another project I'll quickly take you through, which is at the junction of Vellayambalam. So this entire area is in the heart of the city, and Kerala has a very high density requirement. And so when we went to the site, we realized all around our site is these 12-story, 13-story buildings. And we knew that if we build the traditional way from ground up, there will be no space left for the people who are going to live there. In other words, there will not be any community space. In other words, there will not be any space which they can call it as a home. The unit just becomes one part of what you need to live in an urban context. And so what we did is we realized when we studied the building regulations, we could go much taller than our neighbors. We started organizing our density from the top, from 20 stories down. Our site, interestingly, had a 10-meter dip. Trivandrum has a very high terrain. So the site was almost 10 meters below the street level. And so we used that entire 10 meters for parking. In other words, put all the parking on the 10 meters, brought the ground up to the street level. And because we started organizing the density from the top, by the time we reached the third and the fourth floor, we got all the density that were allowed to build in that site. And so we ended up with this very interesting section where we left the entire site as a park. All the parking is below, and the unit starts at the second and the third level. We call it as a community veranda. Veranda is such a crucial part of a house in Kerala that we said that if you go from a house to a housing, we need to take some of those qualitative spaces along with us. So we created this entire site as a community veranda. It becomes a park. Only some amenities and play spaces come down to the ground, and the unit starts at the third and the fourth floor. And the units are designed in a way that each of these units stops at different levels, so that they kind of open up into that space, creates a section which becomes a lot more interesting, almost like a reverse skyline. Similar to what I talked about, the building becomes an umbrella, so you can be in that space, have a cup of coffee when the rain comes down, and enjoy that beautiful weather, even though it's a very high density space. In other words, give the building back to the people, create a sense of place and identity for the people. And that's kind of how that space was envisioned. The building is nearly complete, so you can see the scale of that. This is the landscape is right now going on, but that's that space. It's almost 4 stories, and these are corridors at the lower level. So when you walk on those corridors, you are looking down into that park. The spaces are being, the landscape is being done now, so you can see it's done on top of that parking. So you don't experience the parking; you're constantly experiencing people in some sense. This is another project, but in Trivandrum, but in the heart of the city. That's Vellayambalam Junction. Very interesting site because almost as 3-story buildings, and institutional. And this is the first site where height is allowed. So, in other words, how do you kind of create a sort of a relationship like that, where almost 180 degrees of our site is neighbors are all 3 stories and 4 stories, and then suddenly you have this 20-story building kind of sits right in that junction. So as an urban designer, it was clear to us that that scale will really strengthen that junction. If I have to do a pure urban design diagram for this entire area, I will put my tallest building there because it really anchors that junction. It creates a sense of identity for that junction. In other words, it helps create a place for that junction, not just for the building. And that scale, in some sense, offered that. But there was also this wonderful pedestrian scale where there are continuous streetscape activities, retail activities that happen. And the people who walk on the street were constantly kind of negotiating or relating to that 1-story, 2-story, or 3-story scale. So, how do you negotiate both these scales? On one hand, at a larger city level, we knew that scale really kind of strengthened that junction. But at the next level, we also wanted this relationship to continue, that 2-story, 3-story scale to continue, so that that streetscape, while somebody walks on the street, it kind of becomes a continuous streetscape without a break happening. And often you find that these kind of high-end residential buildings, when they come to the city, it just becomes a big compound wall and cut off from the city. And these were the challenges that we were facing. And so one thing we did is to really analyze and kind of look at the section of the context. In other words, if you map the section of the context, you will realize that there is a scale which is a 3-story built, and then there is a large swaths of open space. Then there is another 3 or 4 stories. Then there is open space. There is a certain relationship between built and unbuilt in that section. So what we did is that we took that horizontal section of the city or the context, and then we flipped it up and vertically. So we said, what if that same relationship continued vertically up? In other words, we broke that scale of the building into multiple housing clusters in some sense. So after every 3 or 4 stories, there is a community space which kind of weaves in, and we wanted a retail piece to happen at the ground, and it comes down to this much closer to the street, so that that building participate in that continuous streetscape. In other words, we didn't want this building to be gated and isolated from the city. We wanted that building to participate in the city activity. So in other words, the larger density is pushed back and lighter. To the street level, it continues to kind of operate at that 1-story, 2-story. So if I walk here, I'm relating to that smaller scale. Only when I look up, I start to kind of experience that density, and I pull this back, and that's kind of become the section of the building. Certain imaginations of the section initially. So this is the streetscape section. So you can see here the 1-story mass, the retail piece is kind of pulled out closer to the street, and the rest of the density is pushed back in. So when you walk here, you are relating to a scale which is much more comfortable at a human scale. That's kind of how the building, it's complete now. So you can see here at a distance, it kind of creates, it anchors that junction, brings in a certain identity to that junction. But at a street level, it becomes very open and participate in that cityscape. It's a Starbucks there now. So these were challenging things that we had to convince the client was very keen that there is no retail activities here because it's a high-end residential. This thing, we said, you can find a good retailer who can come in and bring in revenue, but we want that building to participate in that cityscape. So anybody can now go inside and kind of experience that Starbucks and experience that building, while the larger density kind of push back in. We put the pool on the top of that retail so that when you are in that public space, you also experience that city. It's at the first floor level. So even for the residents, you can kind of experience that city, the hustle and bustle of the city. And that's kind of how the building was imagined. And like I said, at a larger level, it really kind of creates an identity for that junction. Similar approaches in other housing projects. This is in Bangalore. Every house opens into a community space. The building, the parking is vanished in the peripheries. It becomes a pedestrian space. Everyone can step out from every house into that garden and the community space. In other words, allow the building to vanish to a large extent and allow community spaces to kind of take over in that spaces. This is the last project. I'll end with this. Again, another challenging project in Bangalore, where when we go to the site, you see these wonderful banyan trees and the rain trees. How do you negotiate a higher density, almost 2.5 FSI into that building, a 12-story building within that context? We mapped all the trees and then we started carving around those large trees. Some of the trees were transplanted. We created a zone here where you can kind of transplant, put all those trees. But the larger trees we couldn't transplant. So around the banyan trees and the rain trees, we carved that building. Every unit then opens into each of these tree clusters so that there's a complete relationship between my house and my tree. So even though at a macro level, there was a larger idea of carving around these trees, at a micro level, we wanted that tree to kind of connect with each of the units so that there is a strengthening of that relationship between the tree and the house. And then each of the units were designed in a way that the master bedroom, living, dining, etc., opened into the tree cluster with a large balcony, allowing the tree to kind of come into the house in some sense. So this is at a mid level, you can see that relationship. All of these are these public spaces within the house, which kind of opens up and create that relationship to the trees. And the ground again is left open largely as an amenity space for to experience those trees. So there are reading lounges around the banyan tree, there are play spaces around the rain tree, and then the roof multiplies as a community space. Every roof becomes a landscape space, and that's how the building kind of weaved around those trees. So you can see the context, and then we allowed those trees to the building to really kind of weave around that space. So it opens up and the cluster opens into that. So this is from a balcony. So you see, you start to experience the city completely differently. The mood within that balcony changes because of the layering of the trees and the louvers, so that the way the light and the shadow falls into those balconies completely changes through the day. And it creates a very, very fascinating experience while you are in that space, and then create pockets for anybody to experience those trees. We no longer live in a world of unlimited land resources. Buildings without a relationship to the land cannot continue to be the norm. Cities are increasingly becoming a collection of objects with little concern for their relationship to each other or for the larger idea of the city. Spaces left between them have become undesirable and inhabitable. Cities need squares, parks, walkways, and spaces for children, places integral to community life that encourage human interaction and sharing of pleasant experiences. We must develop a sensitivity to public space in urban and suburban environments where the space between is becoming more important as densities increase. Our neighborhoods have become unhealthy places to live and work, islands of life isolated in wastelands of space. There has to be an organic relationship between buildings, people, sidewalk, open space, and parks, not just isolated buildings rising up. The challenges that we face today, we will need high density, but we also need an intense use of the land. We believe that contemporary practices should urge to develop social values of our built environments. We need to be concerned with the collective production of urban reality, with the rhythms of work, home life, and leisure activities in which a society decodes and reproduces its speciality. Boundaries created within spaces are incompatible components to the wholeness of a city. The cities of the future should not be just dense. It should encourage creation of a strong sense of place and urban identity by merging personal and social identities. The search for place is at its core a search for meaning, and in that quest, architecture has a profound responsibility to create spaces that not only house but also inspire, connect, and endure. If architecture is to address the challenges of our times, climate resilience, social justice, and spatial equity, it must step beyond its aesthetic and technical confines to become a medium of negotiation between people, politics, and place. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you for such a thoughtful presentation. It was truly enlightening for all of us. The way you walked us through every project of yours highlighted not just the architectural elements, but the people and experiences behind them as well. Your clarity, generosity in sharing, and the ease with which you translate complex ideas into simple, very relatable design gestures has been truly inspiring for all of us. Thank you. So we are open for Q&A. Please drop in your questions in the chat box. Meanwhile, before we move on to the Q&A session, we have a third question for the day. Get ready to be answering it. Okay, here goes the question. What does RED in architecture red stand for? There you go. You can drop in your answers, please.
Did you bring that up, Biju, in your presentation?
I touched upon a little bit, but I didn't really emphasize. Yeah.
Right. Let's see what they say.
Yes.
Brick.
Interesting.
Yeah, I am from Kerala, so I have a bit of red in me anyway. So.
Right. While we wait for that, you can start the Q&A, Sangeet. You have some questions that have come earlier, right?
Yes, ma'am. So we have a few questions, sir. I'm reading out a couple of them. So we have one from Vijay Kishore from Dr. MGR. So the question goes, in your experience, how can architects balance modern construction demands with traditional earth-friendly building practices?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, I have to say a lot of our work is in the urban areas. Not that we don't want to work on rural settings. So a lot of our work has to deal with density. I also personally come from a thinking that, which I didn't touch upon in the presentation, is the fact that we strongly believe that density is crucial to our sustainable living as a country, because we are a country of 18% of world's population, the most populated country in the world, and we have only 2.5% of global land. In other words, we have a very unfair share of land compared to the rest of the world, and we believe that if you are able to take care of 18% of world's population needs in 2.5% of global land, it's a wonderful sustainable way of living. And so for us, density is a crucial part of sustainability in our context. And so a lot of our negotiations, and you'll see that in the presentation as well, a lot of our negotiation is to make density livable, and so that it becomes a wonderful sustainable way of living. And so our explorations with a lot of the traditional materials, other than of course using brick and natural ones, and we are doing the council building in Bangalore, where we are working with mud blocks and more traditional materials. Our higher density projects, we were not able to kind of work with those materials, of course, because they are not been explored that much when it comes to density. And so my engagement with materials are limited to few projects and not really in the hardcore projects. But it is very, very crucial to kind of understand that we need to kind of, and it's a conversations I had with many architects who practice with in that realm, especially like to some extent with Chitra, but also with Dharmesh and Auroville, is to kind of really look at how do we build density out of these traditional materials. And I think that's something that we need to really work more and more on to be able to create more sustainable communities. And so in some sense, my experience had been limited, but I feel very strongly we need to explore and research more into how do you kind of use these materials to create more and more denser buildings, and allow density to come in. I know I didn't answer the question directly, but
No worries, sir. The projects were very detailedly explained, so it does answer quite a bit of it. We have another question from Vishandhini V from Nehru School of Architecture. She says, in your view, what makes building truly for the people? Is it functionality, cultural connection, emotions it evokes, or how do you outweigh or
Just
between them?
just design in a way that it allows people to be comfortable, in the sense that the scale, like the both the aeronautical building and or even that Miyasi project that I showed. I mean, Miyasi project is very close to my heart because you could see that transformation from an object, a campus which was completely operated as a enclave within themselves, to really cut open that and open it up to the and give it to the larger community and allow people to kind of really come into that spaces and celebrate life. So it's not just about it's as architects we often think about designing the built. It's really the unbuilt where the life is. And the more we do projects, especially institutional projects we realize that more than the built, because the built keeps changing. When we did the aeronautical building, halfway through the aeronautical building, part of that building became a management school. In other words, the economics had changed, and the institutions, the programs have also changed with that change in the economics. And so then we wondered what does it mean to design highly specific to a program. So we started looking, these are learnings that we take. Then we started looking buildings as rather frameworks, which is organized around the unbuilt. In other words, you're designing the unbuilt, which then becomes the place to hold people, and then around which the programs can change. It doesn't matter. And the greater transformations, if you historically look at it, spaces that adapted well are the ones who lived longer, the buildings that lived longer. So, and the crucial part of that adaptation is the design of the unbuilt, thinking about the unbuilt. And so in all these projects, you will see, the story is in the unbuilt. It's not really in the built. And it's, of course, its relationship to each other. And so the idea is to kind of look at buildings as frameworks for life to exist within that. And when you start to look at like that, then the buildings opens up to kind of be very transformative over a period of time. And so make people centric, make buildings more as places as opposed to objects.
Yes, sir. We also have Disha from Manipal School of Architecture and Planning asking us a question. In large urban projects, you often need to collaborate with diverse stakeholders, planners, engineers, government bodies, and local communities. What are the biggest challenges you face in aligning their interests, and how do you manage or resolve conflicts, if any?
Yeah, I mean, there are nothing like a biggest challenge. It's all challenges there. And so I think that's why I said, you, as an architect, you have to be extremely patient. You need to know that change doesn't happen over time, the good change. And, we often kind of stress on the fact that there has to be some amount of community engagement, etc., just to kind of make sure that process is in place. But you are a facilitator at that level. One thing I've learned is that you have to maneuver these things. You need to understand the personalities of these different public officials, and wherever you see opportunities, you grab them and push them. And so in Chennai we had some wonderful IAS officers over the years, and many architects like us has been constantly been engaging with them, and in many times failed. And that's what I said, that project that I showed initially, we have the tender drawings ready, it's almost ready to tender, but it took like 4 years to kind of get there, or 5 years to get there. And so you have to be extremely patient when you are operating in a public realm. You have to look, in some sense, think of it, beyond the business of architecture, and say that you have these larger responsibilities to engage with it. As an architect, you have both a legal contract with your client, but you also have a social contract with the city or the place that you operate in. And the client will not pay you to kind of think about who is living next door, what is the context. Client is paying you to design a particular brief in a site. But as an architect, you have a social contract within which you need to think about what does that building do to the neighborhood, what does that building do to the city, how does it fit in there, right? These are all like that very high end residential project that I showed. That project was a challenge to get the retail on the ground floor, because the client was like, "No, it is the most expensive building in Kerala." And he's saying, "You are telling me that I should allow public into the building, right?" So, and then we kept on persisting. First the entire ground was retail. It finally became half of the ground floor. But it still eventually, I mean, he of course went and found a retailer who will pay him high rent, Starbucks. But that was a negotiation. It was a huge negotiation. We had to design in a way that we created a entry. We pushed the entry back for the residents to the back. We said there will not be any issues with securities, etc. And then carve that portion of that building and give it to the city, and make it participate in that city building process. And so for us, we are very clear that every bit that we do adds up to become the city. And so every project that you do in a city is an urban design project. It has a relationship, it has a meaning, it contributes or it doesn't contribute. Both are important, and we need to be aware of it and kind of find engagement in that sense. So it requires tremendous amount of patience. And I think when one presents this, it looks nice and easy, but it's a hard work of a lot of people behind the scenes, which kind of goes into make these buildings. But you have to find fulfillment, by being patient. And you have to believe, and that's why I said, to be an architect, you have to be an ultimate optimist. You have to constantly believe that you can bring about that change, and you have to, of course, work towards that, right? But if you don't believe that I can bring that change, I will not be able to do anything. So it's easy to give up in the world that you operate in. But it's also I would also say that it's also easy to take a completely opposing point of view also in this world. But it's a very tough job to negotiate between the two. And so a lot of our work is in that negotiation. We believe that change comes in those negotiations. And so we operate at a space where these negotiation constantly kind of happens. In that process, you have to give a little bit up, but you also need to be clear that what you give up is not really the sort of the most meaningful one in the project.
Sakit, I don't know if it resonates with what we were talking about yesterday for the prompts for the other, talking about
Very
how,
much does.
we were just discussing about how projects in general should look like. You were talking about, gated communities also giving space back. And that's exactly what I was talking about yesterday with them. Nice. Yeah.
What inspired you to adopt a people-first approach in your architectural practice?
Yeah, so I told you, I was telling you that story about how we were all influenced who studied in that time by these objects, the Corbusiers of the world, and I mean they were on our head. And I think a lot of my personal change happened when I went into urban design. I started seeing the world differently. I started looking at architecture differently, and then realized that the thing I mean, see, the act of building is an unsustainable act. At some point, we all need to realize that. Right? So we are sinners to begin with, in some sense. Right? So it's a very humbling thing to kind of really know that. And so if what I'm going to do is going to be unsustainable to the world, I have to make sure that what I build, and you have to build for the needs of the people. And so all I can do is to make sure that what I build is being used by the people, and give it back to the people and the places. And so that really kind of, once that happened, you start to look at the world differently. You started looking at architecture differently, less of an object, more as a sort of a framework, like I said initially, for people to come, congregate, celebrate life. It's what holds people. The buildings is what holds people in, and people should be able to really celebrate in that. And so that kind of really kind of changed the way one looks at the projects, and looked at the world also. And you realize that buildings are not that relevant in some sense, but you still have to do it
We can take one more question from MIT Gwalior.
We have a question regarding how can a civic building embody values, inclusivity, transparency, and accessibility for all citizens?
Yeah, so much the way, see, we are living in a world where we are constantly told that, or we have this heightened paranoia of security, right? I mean, we are told that somebody is after us all the time. And not just the civic buildings, you look at any building, even campuses that we design, it's a challenge to keep them open. And I mean, you will find larger universities with 10 different departments. Each department is locked up, has a locked up building at the end, right? So there is a certain kind of, paranoia within which we live, where we think that, everything has to be closed up. And it's what is fascinating. And when we did that Miyasi project, we went back to the client and told this. We said that we claim that we live in a highly social world. We claim that our economics is driven by the fact that we live in a highly social world. Yet our buildings are becoming very, very antisocial. Our buildings are becoming more and more exclusive, and we decide who comes into my building and who doesn't come into my building. And so the fundamental nature of any civic building should be that it is porous and open, and it welcomes people in depending on, without really kind of excluding any one of them. And you will see that the world changes when you do that. And that's the wonderful advantage of living in a city, is that the idea of city living is that it is about shared living. All of us comes to the city, at least the ones who live in the city, comes to the city to live and start sharing resources. And the sustainability comes from the fact that we are sharing those resources. And so it's important that our buildings, especially the public buildings, start to kind of represent all of these, and create porosity, transparency, and accessibility, so that it doesn't seclude people from one to another. I mean, a lot of you often find many of our public parks are closed. It's a very strange thing. We call them open space, but they are actually closed, and it only opens in a particular time of the day. Very, very strange way we build our cities in some sense. But you go to any matured cities of the world, you will actually find that, these spaces are open for anybody. And cities are great levelers, much like you go to a campus. When you go to a campus in, again, many of the Western countries, they are great levelers. Once you are in the campus, there is no difference between who's rich, who's poor, what space, etc. Cities are like that. And Korea used to tell this wonderful story of that money lender in his book, That Place in a Shade. He says that a money lender and a poor guy, lower caste guy, both live in the same village. And then they don't look at each other in the village. They can't come close to each other in the village. Yet one day both of them come to Mumbai and then take the BEST bus. And then there you find the money lender sitting next to the lower caste person, right? That's the beauty of the city. And nobody else can narrate it so better than, tell stories than Korea. And that's the beauty of the city. It breaks all these barriers, it unites us in some sense. But yet, how are we building our cities today? If you have to design a new city, say for example, Chennai, I mean, Adyar will be gated, Besant Nagar will be gated, right? We will be building gated communities. All our neighborhoods will be gated. Imagine Bandra being gated, or a Goregaon being gated, or a Santa Cruz being gated in Mumbai. But if we have to design a completely new Mumbai today, that will be our imagination. And that's the unfortunate way we are kind of developing our cities. We are not looking at the real potential of the city, why cities are sustainable, and what makes them sustainable. And so it's very important that at least the civic buildings, the public buildings, really kind of promote porosity, openness, transparencies, all the things that you mentioned.
Very rightly mentioned, sir. That taps a lot of points, yes. And we have a lot of congratulations and thank you and a lot of appreciation coming in the chat from professors, from faculty, students as well. So with this,
Thank
I
you.
think we could we wrap up. If at all, if anybody would still want to unmute and ask questions, that's okay. Otherwise, we can wrap up the Q&A session. We are still waiting for you to answer on that. What does red in architecture red stand for?
Nobody
No
knows.
answer? Sir has very detailedly explained a lot in his project. So yeah. If we yes, okay, we are getting some.
Reconnecting with environmental design.
Yes.
Yeah, it's about research and design. So RED is a short form of research and design. So it's architecture, research and design. So we knew that. So one thing we learned is that we look at every project as a research project. In other words, we know that we don't have the time within which we operate or do our projects. We don't have to wait for a project to come and then do the research. So every project we get, we make it into a research project. We analyze the context, we understand, so that every time we do one project in a neighborhood, we understand a bit of that neighborhood, even if it's a very small project, and that analysis may not have any relationship or influence the design. We still use it as a way to kind of really understand that neighborhood, what are the things that could influence, etc. And then at somewhere it clicks again, and then you start to kind of take it forward.
Great. I'm sure
Thank you, sir.
so many nuggets that these students today would have taken back. So happy.
Yes, definitely. A lot of learning for all of us. Thank you once again, sir.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank all colleges, faculty, and students that have been an active part of this session and Saint Gobain for making this possible. Once again, thank you everyone for logging in. So we meet next
you.
on the 16th of September.